Hi, everyone, and welcome to this KodeKloud live session. In this session, we'll be chatting with Natan Yellin, mostly about his career journey from software engineer to CEO at Robusta, as well as we'll be comparing some cloud technologies with Kubernetes and give some advice and knowledge on those things. But before we do that, the reason why we are here is KodeKloud Free Week. What is Free Week, you ask? Well, let me share a little bit about that. This week, and this week only, I think maybe once a year, KodeKloud is completely free, 100%, which means that all our labs and all our premium courses are accessible free of charge, which is awesome. You'll even have access to KodeKloud Engineer 2.0, which is a real world kind of project example where you'll get to learn from real case studies. Let me see. Here you have a small example. So you get multiple choice questions. You'll actually have an interactive terminal where you'll have to apply your knowledge, the knowledge that you gain. And it's a sandbox environment, which means that there's nothing installed on your own machine. Everything is sandboxed on the KodeKloud environment, and you can get started. It's really plug and play. What we also have prepared for you is a few learning paths. So it doesn't matter whether you want to deep dive into specific DevOps technologies, whether you want a specific engineering track, specific tools that you've learned or you want to learn more of, and even cloud technologies, it's all available here. Once you figure out what you want to dive deep in and learn from, you can select a track, and this is where you start off. First, we'll ask you what your set of knowledge is currently, what your base level is. So it doesn't matter whether you're starting out or whether you've already heard about a few concepts or you're more intermediate and you want a real advanced course in that way. You can select where you start off of and we can give you a track which really hones your fundamental knowledge from the start, right? So you don't jump in and we go to the end. We really build up that knowledge, which is also going to make sure that it retains over the year's time. Now, this is one of my favorite features, which is basically how much time can I spend per day? Because based on that, we can calculate how long you'll take to complete the track with all the material and labs in there. So we're going to put a QR code on your screen right now, which will bring you to the landing page. There you can sign up immediately and you'll have access to all the labs. Having that said that, let's start the conversation with Natan. Hey, man.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you again as well. Yeah. Let's kick this off because, like me, I'm assuming that other people are also interested in kind of starting their own business. But for me, I haven't taken that step, right? There's always things software related that I feel like I can learn more to get more comfortable before taking that step. And even from a business principle side, I feel like there's a lot of stuff to learn. But you did kind of take that step. I mean, you're doing it right now. Can you walk us through kind of that career journey? What led you to start your own company in the first place?
So I think most of these stories, in all honesty, and I'll walk you through it. It's an interesting story, but I think most of these stories are to some degree a lie. Meaning life unfolds.
I hope yours is not.
No, but it always is to some degree. Life unfolds and things kind of happen, opportunities come up. And then you look back and you try and make sense of it and you say, oh yeah, well, of course I went here and I did this and because I did that and I did that. Like, but you're telling a story in reverse and kind of like picking up the facts of your life that support that narrative. So I'll walk you through it. But what I'm trying to say is to everyone out there that real life is messy. It's never a nice story, like I'll tell you. And you just have to look around for the opportunities that come up, for sometimes even the short-term stuff that you can pursue without always knowing where it's going to go. So you have an opportunity to start doing a small business, something small even on the side, and that thing on the side becomes bigger. And then you have an opportunity to go and to quit your main job and do that full time, and you take that, but you don't necessarily know where it's going to end up. And then before you know it, you're running a team of 30 people, right? But like, you didn't necessarily know it would end up that way at the end. So I think a big part of it is kind of that willingness to go back to how we were as a child without all that pressure, and to a little bit have that mindset of like, let's just play. Like let's play around with things a little bit. Let's see where it goes. Let's do stuff that looks interesting, and let's try and always learn. And then from there, stuff like ends up happening. I can go back and I can tell the proper story if you like as well.
I like having that kind of curiosity mindset, because I feel like people in tech, and especially in this field, you can't go far without curiosity. It's something that is kind of a necessity, because things keep evolving, and you have to have that playfulness and that drive to learn in that way as well.
Yeah, I have a 5-month-old baby now,
Mm.
so I'm thinking a lot of baby analogies, but, like, he'll get excited just if he takes his foot and puts it in his mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, like, but as we grow, we lose some of that, what it takes to excite us and to kind of see what happens when you do things, and I think it's important for your own growth to kind of retain some of that kind of let's try stuff mindset without always knowing where it's going to end up, without always knowing whether it's a good idea to put your foot in your mouth or not.
Yeah,
Think, uh,
exactly.
so it all got started though back in high school. I participated in a little known contest, a competition called Google Highly Open Participation Contest or something like that. It sounds like it had like the same initials, I think, as that. And
It's such a long one.
yeah, except with the G at the beginning.
Mm.
And they changed the name a bunch of times later on. So I participated in this kind of competition for high school students to get them involved in open source projects. And I didn't win. There were like 10
Mm.
winners that flew out to Google headquarters or something and like got to eat at all the restaurants there or whatever. There was and had some big ceremony. And none of that happened with me. I just participated in something, but I kind of fell in love with that project. I got involved in GNOME Linux and started writing some code in Python and started learning and continued it after the competition ended. And then eventually, I went out, I got sponsored to go up to a few different hackathons, one at MIT and then later on one in Bolzano, Italy, a beautiful country. And to go out to kind of participate in these open source projects. And I don't know why my parents let me, but they did. Um, and I was just in high school at the time. And then fast forward a long time, I did a career and I got a degree in computer science. And for a long time, I really stepped away a little bit from the open source world. I was really busy with my professional life and working on proprietary software. And I always had a bit of an itch to do something on my own, to really be able to create something from nothing, but to be able to solve a problem that bothered me, but to solve it in a way that I thought was a good solution. And so fast forward now almost a decade, and about 2 years ago, I was working at another startup, and we were doing a lot of stuff in Kubernetes, and we were doing cybersecurity for Kubernetes, and developing software and doing the whole eBPF spiel, and that's a low level stuff. And I was writing code throughout that entire kind of 10-year period. I really stayed hands on, writing code, doing that low level work, and one thing that kept on happening again and again was that me and my co-founder kept getting called when we were other places to help people solve problems in production. It was really annoying. I would be at dinner and we'd get a call and I'd have to walk someone through the steps of troubleshooting something in production. My co-founder was in Sri Lanka, and in Sri Lanka, he was on vacation. I think he was surfing, and then by the side of the road, he's like on the phone with the people from the company saying, okay, go here, click here, and look at this graph on the dashboard, and look at this Prometheus metric, and do this, and take these logs. And we both kind of just got sick of it. And it's like there's so many observability tools out there. There's so many monitoring tools out there. It's like, really, why does the world need another one? On paper, it seems like a really bad idea, but we weren't happy with any of it. And we felt like everyone in the world was just so focused on getting more data and collecting more data. And again, like new data with eBPF and with service, with sidecars and with the open telemetry and you name it, and traces and now continuous profiling. And everyone was so focused on gathering all this data. And that's all important and all it has in place. But all that data would kind of like go somewhere. It's like this big hose and it fills up a bucket and the bucket's overflowing. Everyone's just focused on turning that hose up to maximum and putting more water in. And at the other side of that, it's coming out and it's going nowhere and no one's ever looking at it. The people are looking at it, but now there's so much data, they don't even know where to go and look.
Yeah.
So what we said with Robusta is we said three things. We said, one, we're not collecting enough data. So there's an observability problem here for Kubernetes, and there's a monitoring problem. There's some real pain points. But we're not collecting more data. There's enough data out here actually, and that data is sitting in Prometheus and sitting in other locations. So whatever we do, we're going to try and do on top of the existing data instead of reinventing the wheel. 2, we wanted to do it open source. So we wanted to have at least some open source offerings so that every engineer anywhere could really experience some of the value. I think often with enterprise software, and if you look at some of the, I won't give any names, but if you look at some of the big players in the monitoring and observability space, they have these teams of salespeople, and as soon as they figure out that you're a lead, they will start calling your phone nonstop, and they won't let go of you. And you never even tried the product. Sometimes even to try it, you have to speak to the person to get set up and start seeing it. And we felt from our own experience as developers and as people who sometimes even bought tools, but we felt that it was really important to be able to try tools first before you had to make a decision whether you're going to buy them or not. So we wanted to have something here open source that was really like fully feature that you could try on your own. And then the third part of that is, okay, well, we still have to build a sustainable business around this in the company. And we have to have a way to make money. So we wanted to also build out a commercial platform that was really focused on enterprises and larger companies and some of the problems that they made. So those were the 3 things kind of that led us to take that crazy step of starting our own business. And along the way, some of that changed. We recently were able to take what we thought initially would just be for enterprises and to make it actually free for everyone. To give out a free tier that's for unlimited clusters, unlimited nodes, and to be even not open source, but to still even for the proprietary stuff to be able to go a little bit farther on that in giving it away. So it's been a bit of a journey, and I know that was a bit long, but that's how I've gotten, I guess, from high school student who didn't know much about anything to where I am today. Still not knowing about anything a lot of the time, but learning as I go.
Exactly, step by step and gradually. Was it open source from the start? Because I think that's a real smart move nowadays, having something open source, whether you do that in advance or whether you do that when you've already established some stuff and you open source part of it even. I feel like the old kind of business model of pay per seat or kind of a subscription thing before you get to try out the tools is kind of outdated now with all the free stuff out there, especially since a lot of the decision-making power nowadays is more so within engineering teams. So making that hurdle as small as possible really sounds beneficial.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. And we started with something open source. So we actually built the first major open source project, which takes Prometheus alerts, and then it automatically pulls in like pod logs and pulls in graphs. It takes Prometheus alerts and it augments them with all this other data. So we released that as open source, and we only built out our commercial offering at a much later stage. And then we actually released 2 other open source projects after that, also around Kubernetes and monitoring and solving some very specific pain points there. But we started with open source, and then we built out kind of the proprietary. And the nice thing about doing it that way is when you start with the proprietary and then you figure what's open source, then you're going from like these big enterprise companies or Fortune 500, and then you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what parts of this is open source? That's sometimes hard to figure out. Whereas if you start with the open source, then you have something that's broadly used by all these companies, and you like say to them, oh, hey, we're building something here, like, would this interest you? And you reach out to the enterprise, it's sometimes easier to go in the opposite direction because you can get so much feedback from people who already know you.
Yeah, because the barrier to entry is like you download it, you plug and play, you try and make that as easy as possible, which is, I think, how it should be, right? You want to try things out before you make a decision. Especially monitoring is kind of a crucial part in software development in a product you're developing, right? Because if shit hits the fan and your monitoring is not up to par, it can cost you a lot and real quick as well.
Yeah. I think there's like 2 costs that people pay when there's bad monitoring. One of them is the shit hits the fan in the crisis moment. And then the other is like the death by 1,000 cuts. So one thing that's really common that we see is like people have all the best in class tools set up and all like the monitoring. They have, let's say, a team of 20, 30 or a group of 20, 30 DevOps engineers or platform engineers or infrastructure engineers, what have you. And they're supporting a development organization, names of thousands of developers. This is really common in the enterprise. They have all the best in class tools. So they have all the monitoring data, everything you can think of. But when there's an alert on a microservice running on Kubernetes, the application developer never opens up any of those systems. He creates a Jira ticket for the DevOps engineer and says, there's an issue, can you fix it? So that's like an anti-pattern because you invest in all this stuff. Again, you have that hose, you're pouring so much water into these buckets, but no one's even using them. Instead, they're going to your DevOps team. Your DevOps team has now become the bottleneck. But I see there are a few questions in the chat really about how to get into stuff and to get started. Do we want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Let me see. One person said congrats. I'm assuming that was when you were talking about your newborn.
Yeah.
Then it would be nice to get a project to kind of work on that resembles real world stuff. And the interesting thing is KodeKloud is actually, we have a product like that. It's called KodeKloud Engineer, Andrew. So you might want to check that out. And then, this is a hard name, so I'm not going to pronounce it. But the question is basically, can we kind of go on to how you would start with Kubernetes and become an expert in it in and of its own? I mean, I'm assuming, for me, it's always hard to label myself as an expert, but I see you as an expert when it comes to Kubernetes, just by virtue of seeing what you're doing and putting out there. How was kind of your learning path when we're talking about your own journey?
So I don't even know if I'd call myself an expert. No, because if you look at half my posts, I'm asking, half my posts, I don't know what to do with something. I'm just asking people and learning from other people and what they're doing. So I think I'm still learning as I go. I mean, there are definitely areas I'd consider myself an expert in, but there are also areas where I don't feel like there are areas where I can name 2 or 3 people who like have way deeper knowledge than I do. Like I wouldn't go into you wouldn't I wouldn't be the person to go into like configure nitty-gritty details of your ingress controller. I'd be lost. I'd go off to the reference material and I'd look it up and I'd figure it out, right? That's easy. But I wouldn't know without really looking at the reference material what to do.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas for other areas, okay, I can type away in Veeam and like do it all with my eyes shut. Fine, I can do that. But it really depends on the area.
I think still having the confidence to be like, okay, I might not know, but I can figure it out, right? I can find the in-depth knowledge either through a community, which is by virtue of trying and looking at the documentation, having the confidence to be like, I mean, I might not be an expert, but I can figure it out if I need to, right? With time. I think the confidence is something you build up, and especially starting out, you might not realize that you need confidence to do that, or that you might be able to do so in the first place. But having gone through and having developed software, having played around with enough various technologies, I think you slowly build up that confidence that you can say, okay, I might not know it now, but I can figure it out.
Yeah. So let me give a tip to everyone out there. That's probably controversial. I think you should all stop Googling things and stop looking at GPT. And I'll tell you why. When I got started to learn how to program, and I'm old school, okay? But when I got started, one of my first commercial jobs, they came on the first day of the job. I got these 3 giant reference books, and there was internet back then, but they said you're not allowed to use the internet. We're training you. Like, solve problems on your own. You get stuck, come and speak to us. And what I see now is I see that people use the internet as a crutch. And it's a crutch, though. It's okay with crutches if they get you to the destination faster, right? Like, what's the difference? Is a ski a crutch? No, a ski is a really fast way of getting around if you're in the snow. It's fantastic. But if you have a bunch of skis on and you're trying to walk across the desert, you're going to go really slow. So I think the way that people often use Google is they will use it wrong. And I see this, unfortunately, so many times. Someone has a challenge and it's a really clever person and they're really smart. I know them. And I see this a lot of people, not speaking about anyone specific here, but it's a pattern I've seen with a lot of people I've mentored, especially at previous jobs. And someone that has a challenge, and if they sat down and they spent 10 minutes on it, where they opened up the reference material and they tried to understand, they would do fantastic. They would solve the problem. They would really know and they would really understand. They'd come way easier. Instead, I see them spending 2 weeks Googling stuff, taking the first answer from Stack Overflow or from Google, copy pasting it, it doesn't work, going back to Google, and they never have any understanding and it doesn't work. So I think there's this anti-pattern where people become too reliant on kind of looking for that quick answer. And then you miss the phase where you actually understand it. So I'll use Google, of course, but if I'm using Google, I'm looking up an answer. I'm not copy pasting and applying it. I'm reading the answer. I'm like building a mental model. Does that work? I'm then creating like these falsifiable assumptions. Like, okay, if this answer is true, and this is really the scenario I'm using, then if I ran this command, the output would be whatever. I'm testing that. then I'm saying, okay, yeah, it seems like this is the scenario I'm having that's described online with this bug or whatever, right? And or maybe it's not. And then like I'm internalizing what it's saying, and then I'm going and solving it. And the way I solve it might be an exact copy paste, or it might be something totally different. But I'm trying to understand it like really in depth and not just get the quick fix. Because I think sometimes you're so focused on the quick fix that you miss the fundamental understanding. So my recommendation for everyone out there who's trying to learn something would be to only use Google to find reference materials and limit yourself. So you can't even just use Stack Overflow and you can't use tutorials. Force yourself to go through exercises and real world stuff using reference materials. And once you have the habit of doing that, you'll have this muscle in you that whatever comes up, whatever it is, no matter what, you can always solve it because you will always know that there is reference material there. If there's not, you go to the source code. I've solved bugs by going and looking at the Linux kernel source code when I had a bug using a specific API. And I once found a bug in the kernel by doing that. And there was a real bug in the kernel that was related to the API I was using. So you have to get in that mindset that you can do anything. You can do anything, even if you're the first person in the world who has this issue and no one encountered it on Google and you can't find any of the search results. But you have to build that muscle that no matter what, you can open up reference material or source code or anything, and you can solve something and really fundamentally understand it. It might take you 2 hours, it might take you a day, fine, but you can sit down and get your way through it.
Yeah, I love that take. I do hear an echo. I think it's gone now, actually. I was going to say it's interesting, right? Because of the tools that are available, Google being one of them, ChatGPT now being another one, you get up and running and you can get stuff done really quickly. But what is lacking because of that, or what might lack, is really that fundamental understanding, right? And for me, especially early on, like I don't come from a computer science background and I started out in operations. Then I moved to software engineering and I could be effective. I could be effective really early on. But then when I thought, oh, this would be simple, I would, for my own understanding, work longer on it than what I would expect. And at some point, I really reflected on that and I was thinking back on why that would be. And what I realized is really fundamental understanding wasn't really there yet, right? I could get stuff done and I could get stuff done faster or in a slower way sometimes, but sometimes I wouldn't even know why it would work the way that it did, right? Because of that lack of fundamental understanding there. And the funny thing is, you feel effective, and at some point, something makes you realize that you might be effective now, but because of that lack of fundamental understanding, like you hit a ceiling and you can only do so much, then you have to go back and kind of go back to the basics again. And because of that, you can kind of breach that ceiling and go further, I think.
Yeah, I don't want to give the people the impression that I'm just a dinosaur and like an old fogey, get off my yard. I mean, I am the CEO of a company that's invested really heavily in AI features on top of Azure OpenAI, and like we have stuff now that we've seen really cool results with. Like you're looking at Prometheus or you're looking at a bunch of pod logs, and you say summarize these logs for me, right? And what are the most important errors in these logs? And then you have a log file that's gigantic. Now you like narrow it down to 5 lines. Like there's really cool stuff you can do with AI, and we're doing it. I love it. But at the same time, it can't replace understanding. Like it can assist. I'm not even saying AI can't give real understanding. You have to be careful with hallucinations. There are different approaches. We're still in the early days. Also, what we're doing here. So there's really cool stuff. So I'm not saying in any way don't even use AI or don't use any of this technology. I'm just saying make sure that you have an understanding. And that you're not skipping that phase. So like, I guess a nuanced version of this would be, yeah, of course, use Google, use Stack Overflow, use all those things, but don't ever do it in a way that you don't have a real understanding. And then the pragmatic version of that is, well, when you're first getting started, you will be better served if you just don't use any Stack Overflow in Google, just as a learning exercise. When you're learning, you will be better served by not doing it because you will learn faster.
What is your take on then kind of operating within a team? Because I've always, especially early on when I started out, when I would get a problem, I wanted to take ownership of that problem, right? And I didn't want to ask a question without doing my research, without kind of being hyper specific on that question. And because of that, and because of that mindset, sometimes I would go into rabbit holes that would take kind of away from delivery time, and I would take too long on the implementation side. And then I would have a conversation with my team, and what they said is, listen, we know like ownership is a big thing and you can figure it out, but if it takes you 5 hours to kind of figure it out on your own versus 5 minutes and I explain to you kind of my understanding and we have a shared understanding that way, then pick the option and ask the question. I'm wondering kind of what your experience and take is on that.
I agree with you. Like I've unfortunately had to fire people even where they never knew how to, and we gave feedback on this and we said, listen, you have to go and raise a red flag and like bring in other people. They wanted to just do everything themselves and be completely independent. It hurt the team, it hurt the company, it hurt our customers. I mean, so I think, but I think there it's not just learning. Like if you're just looking at from a learning perspective, right? Then, and it's like someone's going now and they're using KodeKloud to learn, right? And like they're going through and there's like, I think it's, I haven't used KodeKloud myself, but from what I heard, people really like it. I think it is structured in a way that's like really good educationally. If you're focused on learning, that's one thing, that's one side of tools. If you're in a real world environment, working and you have a deadline, their customers and their business goals, now you have additional constraints. And I think most people tend to err on the side of not raising kind of their hand enough and saying, I'm stuck. But I mean, I guess it's nuanced. Yeah.
I was going to say kind of to their own demise, right? If a team would be kind of individuals working on their own island and then coming together and delivering in that way, then that would be fine, kind of that behavior. But a team is not like that, right? You can rely on the knowledge of others. You don't have to be an expert in everything, as long as you've accommodated with kind of that knowledge and those gaps within the team, and then have the confidence as a team to be able to figure things out. But to build up that trust and have those conversations, it needs to be safe enough to be able to ask those questions, and safe enough for other people to answer them kind of without judgment either, and not be like, oh, why don't you know that? Or this is fundamental knowledge. No, if people are really open without judgment and helping, I think that's an environment where you'll then kind of learn and grow the most.
Yeah. There are no stupid questions, only stupid answers.
Yeah, exactly. Let me see, because I see some other questions in the chat. People love ChatGPT, obviously. Me too. And what I also do is sometimes when I don't understand what it's giving me as a code snippet, I try and let it explain what it's doing. And that actually is quite helpful as well, because then I go from just copy pasting to actually trying to understand what the code is doing. And I've learned a lot through that as well.
So I think that's actually an interesting area where, like you were saying about how kind of having a mentor and having someone in the company or someone who can help you. I think there's actually potential here for people who don't have that support network or who are learning on their own. I think there is potential for kind of AI assistants to at least take a little bit of that role of like, okay, well, actually you're on the wrong direction here. So like if you apply this type of thinking now to like how you would use AI and like use ChatGPT effectively to learn, then I think you'd essentially say, okay, well, I'm gonna like ChatGPT, give me an exercise around whatever, right? Here's the exercise around the topic I want to improve in, or I'm going through and I'm doing an exercise that was like built around something specific because I don't even know what I don't know, right? So I'm taking some exercise, I'm doing the exercise, and then I'm stuck. But I'm not necessarily working in an environment now where I have like a really good mentor where I can go to someone who can pull me out. So now after I've tried, after I've sweated, I've broken my back, I've like run into a wall, I banged my head against the wall 5 times, the wall's not cracking, my head's cracking. Like now is the point where, okay, yeah, ChatGPT, this is what I did and it's not working. What could be wrong here? What would you, other directions kind of like, I think that could be really useful, but not like take the exercise, just go ChatGPT the answer, plug it back in, copy paste. You haven't done anything. You haven't learned anything.
Yeah, exactly. For me, I like that, but I also have enough of an understanding to figure out if it's telling me a lie or not. Because sometimes kind of this confidence where it says, no, this is the truth, and it's actually telling you something that is not factually correct, like that, we still have to tweak and get out of there. Because otherwise, if you're using it solely from a learning point of view and it's giving you misinformation in that, that's a hard one, because you're not going to realize then that it is misinformation. So if you're like kind of learning tracks or learning in and of its own, you still need fundamental knowledge to some degree.
I think some of that is stuff we're going to solve with technology over time.
Yeah.
I think when we started building the AI features into Robusta, the first thing we did is like, okay, take a Prometheus alert. Why is this firing? What's wrong? Or take in a bunch of logs. Why is this wrong? And we can get good results. But we found that we really get interesting stuff is not even saying why, but okay, here's a bunch of data from this data and this alert. What is the stuff I should look at? What's the stuff that we should take out? And then cite back to the original log line or give an exact quote. And then we can verify that's even an exact quote, right? Like from the logs. So like pull out the areas that are most interesting and give an exact quote. And then we can even go and theoretically like verify that. So it's not necessarily about why, or like you can force ChatGPT to operate in areas where it's incapable of hallucinating. You might not get an answer. It might pick out stuff that's not the most relevant, but we've actually seen that it can pick out, like do a really good job at picking out the right stuff. Even if it sometimes does a bad job at kind of finding the reason or like giving an explanation.
Yeah, I get that as well. I mean, we've touched a lot with regards to learning more on the how side, how you would pick up or how you would ask questions or what you would Google and whatnot. But from a perspective of someone that's kind of new and wants to get into the DevOps field, or someone that wants to learn more, what technologies would you recommend kind of they pick up first when it comes to their learning preferences or learning path? Do you have a preference there, actually?
I think everyone, and I'm going to get pushback on this, and people will say that. I think there is this different side to this, okay? So I'm prefacing this. I'm giving a big disclaimer up top. This is just one point of view, and there are other opinions on this. But I think everyone would be really well served by having good knowledge, working knowledge in a single programming language. Could be Python, could be Go. You could even be really, really good at bash scripts, like really bash scripts, like the messy stuff with loops and ifs and all the weird bashisms that everyone always forgets.
Yeah.
I think everyone would be, even for DevOps, I think everyone would be really, not everyone, but most people would be better DevOps engineers if they started with like a really good understanding of programming and like early scripting in one specific language, and then moved over more to like Dockerfile and YAML and infrastructure. And I think part of that is if you come to the infrastructure stuff without the application, without the programming knowledge, then sometimes none of it makes any sense. Like a Dockerfile doesn't make sense if you haven't struggled with packaging up an application and like getting it to run on other computers that aren't your own. Kubernetes and all this scaling doesn't make sense if you don't really understand like the issues around running applications at scale and like handling sudden spikes in traffic, all the way holding crash the back off. None of it makes sense if you haven't had like written an application and it's crashing. Now, I do know fantastic DevOps engineers who have zero coding knowledge. And I have a specific person in mind here. I mean, I know someone who's phenomenal. So this is obviously not always true, but I think as a general path, first learn Python and learn it really well. And I've heard very good things about the book Learn Python the Hard Way. I think it aligns with my own thinking here that like you have to just sit down and write code, and you have to suffer to some degree, by which I mean you have to do things wrong. You have to write code that doesn't work in order to write code that does work. So you have to trip up and stumble and then fix it.
Exactly. There's this interesting thing with programming where like practical experience, more so than probably with a lot of other domains, is just gold, right? And without practical experience, without having made those mistakes, struggling and being like, why doesn't this work while it's supposed to work, basically, and figuring things out where it then actually falls flat. I understand that you say from an ops perspective, if you don't have faced those challenges, maybe you don't really know what problems you're solving in the first place. And because you don't know basically what you don't know, things might kind of slip through the gaps there.
There are other paths. Like I recently met someone who has been doing like really heavy networking stuff, like VLANs and it's not even so heavy, but VLANs and like various routing stuff and BGP and like configuring all these Cisco switches, and like doing a lot of heavy duty networking stuff. And now some of that is going out of the world, and he's looking around for jobs. And one of the options that I think would be a really good fit actually would be DevOps and Kubernetes. and he has zero programming knowledge. But I think everything he has and that sort of thinking would translate over really well. And I think he does understand all those issues. So there are other paths you can take here. But for someone who's getting started today, I think the first learn to program, learn Python the hard way, then take an application, Docker file that, right, like containerize it, and then start to get that running in Kubernetes and play with it. I think that's like a really standard path that you can't go wrong on if you're willing to put in the work. And you have to put in the work. That, like, there's no way around that.
Yeah, I love that you highlight that, right? Different backgrounds and different pathways can still cross, and it can add value. And the value that you kind of gain from a certain position, it might not even be in software development, it could be in a specific other domain. You still take that with you. And then with kind of the diversity within the team, you leverage the knowledge that everyone has. And because of that diversity as well, the end product will be better.
Yep.
Let me have a look at the chat because we're kind of running low on time. If you still have any questions you want Nathan to answer, feel free to drop them in the chat. In the meantime, if you haven't already checked out Free Week, there's a QR code on screen right now.
Guys, check it out. I hear really good things about KodeKloud. I've done a few polls on this.
That's awesome.
What is the number one thing that people learn in Kubernetes? Yeah. And KodeKloud is always up there. It's like always one in the top 3 answers.
That's awesome.
It probably comes in number 1 even. But sorry, what was your question?
I was going to ask, like, do you work with a specific cloud technology currently? And if so, like, what is it, on which provider, and which technology really excites you nowadays? Because I've been running a lot of my kind of apps lately on Cloud Run, and I like the simplicity and kind of the reduce in total cost of ownership for my team as well.
So our customers run on Kubernetes or OpenShift, and that has a lot of variants. That often is on-premise, but not always. And that can be on, we see a lot of AKS, that's the Azure offering. We see a lot of EKS, we see a lot of GKE. We see a little bit of Oracle Cloud, funnily enough, which I guess it seems to be gaining in popularity. We see some DigitalOcean. We see all the different Kubernetes offerings, basically. And we're kind of agnostic, like whatever our customers want to run on. If it has an API server and it has something that looks vaguely like Prometheus, so Victoria Metrics, Thanos, Grafana Mimir, Azure Managed Prometheus, like if we have anything that looks kind of vaguely like Kubernetes or Prometheus, then we try and support it. So we have to support kind of everything. I see there's a question here about what's an idea of a Kubernetes project or a good project to learn. And then a variant on that also, around assuming that the programming is a skill that you don't need to know. Okay, take a microservices application. Preferably a funny one, just so that you have some fun. So I recently created an imaginary application that's kind of, I call it Tinder for socks, because I'm always getting like my socks mismatched and I can't seem to find them. And I thought we could have like this application where other people like who can go on like the Tinder for socks and they can match up and like swap socks, which is of course not. But it was fun to play around with. I love
that. Exactly.
Take a semi-real world example that you're comfortable with and that ideally you built yourself so you understand the ins and outs of it. And then try and over-architect that on Kubernetes. So what I mean is you want to end up with that running on Kubernetes and like being auto-scaled according to the amount of traffic you get, and put in a service mesh, of course, so that you can like see the service and the traffic and API gateway, so you can like control different routing rules. Like really, to some degree, I think over-engineer what you actually need on there, but build it up incrementally and make sure you understand each layer. So first, take your application, get it into a Docker container, or run it locally in a container, then run it on a different machine in a container, then run it like on Kubernetes just as a pod, and run it as a deployment. So like work your way up there. But I think there's probably stuff on KodeKloud around this, right? Like around these different paths.
Exactly. Like the hard part of what you're advising is trying to figure out what to do next, right? Because if you don't really have a real life example that gradually builds up in requirements, it's hard to think of those requirements when you're building the thing, basically. And then you might work on something that you're like, okay, am I actually ever going to get into a real life scenario where I'm going to be able to use this or apply this, or is this kind of wasted knowledge in a way? While if you're kind of following a learning track, those are usually tailor-made with real cases in mind, or even based on experiences now and then. Obviously, companies and requirements a bit more obfuscated, but they are experience-based in a way.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just checking the chat.
Hello, Waleed and Shuhab. Waleed, you're at AWS now, I think. It's interesting because like being kind of in these open source communities, you meet people in all these different places and bump into people at conferences.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I really like also about the Kubernetes ecosystem, that people are really friendly.
It's a smaller community than I would have imagined. Like a lot of people know each other, and recognizable names keep popping up here and there, and I'm like, okay, these also know each other. Like it's a really cool network to be a part of, actually.
Yeah. So it's always good to see everyone in all the friendly faces. Okay, so I'll say something again, maybe a little controversial, but none of you should be here. You should all be on KodeKloud doing a course, or we're not KodeKloud, we're reading and learn Python the hard way. Like, if you want to sit down and learn, you guys gotta just write some code and do exercises or write some YAML. You shouldn't listen to guys like me. Like, just go on, right? Like, bump your head against the wall. If it helps motivate, then go ahead. But like, you gotta just sit down and do it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It helps to have an exercise and then to like really measure yourself according to that exercise, so that you can say like, so that kind of you have no excuses. Like, I got this exercise, I'm going to complete this exercise, so help me God. And like when you're stuck or stuff isn't working, you're still going to go and you're going to complete that exercise. And you get stuck on it, but no, you're going to complete that exercise. So I think it helps to kind of really like be able to set goals for yourself, and then to really make sure that you hit those goals. And if you get stuck, like we spoke about, okay, maybe go pull in a friend, pull in ChatGPT, whatever, help yourself get unstuck.
Yeah, based on that, let's round it off here. Everyone, I mean, Nathan just called you out and said, get some real world experience in there. I think it's a good way to round it off. Check out Free Week again. There should be a QR code on screen. Nathan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspective, sharing your learnings and your sometimes controversial opinions. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And if I may, we just made Robusta free on unlimited clusters and unlimited nodes for everyone. So if you guys are using Prometheus today and Kubernetes, it's a free add-on, both the commercial side and the open source. And just so anyone who's thinking like, okay, well, why would you do that? What's the catch? Well, we limit data retention, and we think that people who see value will often think it's worth upgrading. But thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I hope people have taken something away, but I've had a good time, so I'll take that away at least. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on again. Check out Robusta. We're going to put all the links in the socials, all the links to that in the description below. Check that out. And with that being said, thank you for listening. We'll see you maybe tomorrow, because we have another live stream for that as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite platform or on YouTube, and we'll see you next time.